Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is a special edition of Two-Way tonight. It's a Sunday. We don't normally convene, but we are because of everything going on in the world. Very grateful to you for being part of it. Dan Turrentine is here, and he'll be with us in just a moment. And Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, will also join us, and perhaps some other folks will roll right in. Grateful to you for being here. If you'd like to be in on the conversation and you're here on the Two-Way platform, please raise your hand. And if you're watching on X or YouTube, even during war, especially during war, peace, love, and understanding is our watchword. And please, no smack in the chat. Um, I want to start with something the New York Times is reporting that ran just a moment ago. U.S. intelligence officials have detected signs that Iran-backed militias are preparing to attack U.S. bases in Iraq and possibly Syria. And of course, of all the things that are sort of floating out there as possibilities and things that people are looking to see what happens next after U.S. strikes in Iran, the question of whether Iran will retaliate is a big one. The Times says the U.S. is on guard for this, but not necessarily happening. Sunday shows, we'll play some sound from there, particularly the vice president was out explaining and defending. We continue to track reaction from the United States and all over the world. UN meeting earlier today, just a little while ago, actually, where representatives of all the affected countries spoke. Still no indication of what the UN will do. Number of news organizations have published what we call in the business TikToks, stories about the president's decision making. I would say, having read many of them, no great surprises there. And you won't be surprised to hear that the president is managing this whole thing as he does, finest television producer ever to be president of the United States. And the decisions being cast as his, asked a lot of tough questions, decided basically to do this strike unless the Iranians came to the table ready to negotiate, and in the absence of that, moved. David Ignatius, the great Washington Post columnist who writes about these things and reports about them as well as anyone, has a new column up on the Washington Post website that lays out kind of where we are, but demonstrates the reality that no one, at least no one outside the core circle of the president's advisors and maybe in Israel, knows exactly where we're headed here, because it could be very positive. It could get a negotiated deal, or this could spiral to somewhere with a great deal of military conflict. So let me show you a few things. First, number five, please. Iran's foreign minister is traveling to Russia to meet with Putin, ostensibly tomorrow. That's significance. Continue to say the dogs that aren't barking. World reaction, most countries, at least quietly, delighted with what's happened to see Iran's nuclear capabilities minimized. I will say, however, that we don't really know of all the big unanswered things right now in Iran. What kind of military capability do they have left? Are they in a position to strike back at Israel, strike at the United States in places like Iraq? We don't know. Second is, to the extent they have capability, what's their plan now? What is their plan? There's talk about putting mines in the strait. They talk about blockading, cutting off oil. We'll see. How willing are they to negotiate? That's not clear. Most of what's coming out of senior Iranian leadership doesn't sound like they're ready to negotiate. It sounds bellicose and affronted. And some experts in the region are wondering why Donald Trump, in his statement last night and on social media, continues to be a bad cop. Although you'll see in a moment, the vice president was more good cop in what he said. And then what's going on regarding possible regime change or instability within the government? No real signs of that overtly. To the contrary, most of what we've seen out of Iran suggests a rallying around the government. But we know the Israelis continue to say they're not going for regime change, but it wouldn't bother them if it happened, and we'll see what happens there. Israel also continues to say that Netanyahu had a briefing today, as did his defense minister, and they said they're going to continue the mission, and they continue to describe the mission not as regime change, but as eliminating the threat of Iran militarily, both nuclear and missile, and they say they're going to continue. We don't know what the contours of that are. On the U.S. side, what would be acceptable for a deal? We know in more detail in some of these TikTok stories that came out that Witkoff has been in regular touch with the Iranians, including right before the attacks or as the attacks were occurring, making it clear that the U.S. is only going for Iran's nuclear capability and making it clear that the U.S. is ready to talk. If Iran is willing to talk, Iran's position on Friday was they won't talk while the Israeli mission continues, and Israel's not going to back off there. And then again, question 1B to the 1A, front of mind for so many. 1A is Iran going to hit U.S. assets? And then 1B is, what is President Trump's response if that happens? Russia, China, still not a lot. Saudi, still not a lot of clarity about where they are. What the markets will do tomorrow is obviously a big question that everybody will be watching. And then finally, we'll talk about this with Dan and others, which is the Democratic Party, all over the map today from full support for President Trump to calls for his impeachment to a lot of nuanced positions in between. So let's play a few things and then bring our guests in. First, let's listen to J.D. Vance, number 12, saying the U.S. is not at war with Iran. This is J.D. Vance on Meet the Press, number 12, please.
We're prepared for is if they attack us in a maximal direction, first of all, we have got maximum defensive posture. I think that we're going to be able to defend as many of our people as possible. And of course, I'd encourage Americans to pray for our guys in the Middle East because, yes, they are under a significant amount of duress and a significant amount of threat right now. But then, of course, John, if the Iranians attack us, they're going to be met with overwhelming force. And I don't think the president could be clear about this. If you look at what we did yesterday, John, we did not attack the nation of Iran. We did not attack any civilian targets. We didn't even attack military targets outside of the 3 nuclear weapons facilities that we thought were important to accomplish our goal of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So how Iran responds, I think, is ultimately the ball is in their court. But if you look at what we did, it was very precise, very narrowly tailored to our objective. And if the Iranians decide to expand this, then that's ultimately their decision, and the President of the United States will respond in kind.
Okay, so that's not him on Meet the Press. That's him with John Carl on ABC. Do we have him on number 12 with Kristen Welker? It's roughly the same, but I'd like 12 if we have it.
The United States now at war with Iran.
No, Kristen, we're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. And let me just say, Kristen, that we're incredibly grateful and proud of the American Air Force pilots who did an incredible job last night. The operation was really extraordinary. These guys flew from Missouri. They didn't land a single time. They dropped 30,000-pound bombs on a target the size of a washing machine and then got back home safely without ever landing in the Middle East or ever stopping other than to briefly refuel. And of course, they did that in the air. So it's really an incredible operation, a testament to the power of American military. And I think what shows what can happen when you have that great American military in the hands of capable presidential leadership. What we did is we destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. I think we set that program back substantially, and we did it without endangering the lives of the American pilots. That's an incredible thing, and I think we all should be proud. Whatever our politics, we should be proud of what these guys accomplished. A very, very high-impact mission under a lot of pressure.
All right, let's listen to Marco Rubio, a couple sound bites from him. First, number 11, please.
We'll see what Iran decides to do. I think they should choose the route of peace. We've done everything. We have bent over backwards, okay, to create a deal with these people. Steve Witkoff has traveled the world extensively, met with them. Well, not even met with them, met through the Omanis with them and discussed back and forth. We even put an offer to them that they wanted elements of it in writing, and we offered it to them. Very generous offer, by the way. We've done it, and we're prepared right now. If they call right now and say, we want to meet, let's talk about this, we're prepared to do that. The president's made that clear from the very beginning. His preference is to deal with this issue diplomatically. But he also told them we had 60 days to make progress or something else was going to happen. And I think they thought they were dealing with a different kind of leader, like the kinds of leaders they've been playing games with for the last 30 or 40 years, and they found out that's not the case. So this mission was a very precise mission. It had 3 objectives, 3 nuclear sites. It was not attack on Iran. It was not an attack on the Iranian people. This wasn't a regime change move. This was designed to degrade and or destroy 3 nuclear sites related to their nuclear weaponization ambitions, and that was delivered on yesterday. What happens next will now depend on what Iran chooses to do next. If they choose the path of diplomacy, we're ready. We can do a deal that's good for them, the Iranian people, and good for the world. If they choose another route, then there'll be consequences for that.
All right. Again, a lot of speculation about whether Iran's reaction to this, besides whether they'll attack American assets, forces around the world, is will they now try to rush to build a nuclear device? And that's, of course, been one of the cautions given by people who've opposed this kind of action. Say again, it's a mission that's been contemplated for more than 2 decades by previous American presidents. It's a mission previous American presidents considered but did not do. And partly they didn't do it because they were worried about this. David Sanger, the New York Times, wonders whether Iran will rush to build the weapon. And he knows a lot about it. Let's listen to one more Rubio bite on Face of the Nation. This is number 16, please.
You're saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization.
That's irrelevant. I think that question being asked in the media, that's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
that is the key point in
weapon.
U.S. intelligence assessments. You know
no,
that.
It's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not been
I know that better than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But I'm asking you whether the order was given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given. They have everything they need to build nuclear weapons. Why would you bury things in a mountain, 300 feet under the ground?
Right.
Why would you bury why do they have 60% enriched uranium? You don't need 60% enriched uranium. The only countries in the world that have uranium at 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons, because they can quickly make it 90. They have all the elements. They have. Why do they have a space program? Is Iran going to go to the moon? No, they're trying to build an ICBM.
No, but
so
that's a question. That's a question. That's a question of intent. And you know, in the intelligence assessment, that it was that Iran wanted to be a threshold state and use this leverage. I'm talking about the public March assessment, and that's why I was asking you if you know something more from March.
But that's also an inaccurate representation of it. That's an accurate representation of it. That's not how intelligence is read. That's not how intelligence is used. Here's what the whole world knows. Forget about intelligence. What the IAEA knows. They are enriching uranium well beyond anything you need for a civil nuclear program. So why would you enrich uranium at 60%? Right. If you don't intend to one day use it to take it to 90 and build a weapon. Right. Why are you developing ICBMs? Why do you have 8,000 short-range missiles and 2,000 to 3,000 long mid-range missiles that you continue to develop? Why do you do all these things? They have everything they need for a nuclear weapon. They have the delivery mechanisms. They have the enrichment capability. They have the highly enriched uranium that is stored. Yes. That's all we need to see.
Right. Well,
especially in the hands of a regime that's already involved in terrorism and proxies and all kinds of things around. They are the source of all
instability in the Middle East. No one's disputing that. I'm not doing that here.
You've done better this one. One more, and then we'll get to our guests. Okay, go to number 18, please. This is the border czar, Mr. Homan, talking about whether there are sleeper cells in the United States, and then we'll get to our guests.
Assess that issue particularly. How many Iranians are in the country that are in sleeper cells trying to do bad to America right now?
Well, look, you and I have talked about this many times. I said the last 4 years, my biggest concern was this open border was the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen. So I pulled numbers this morning just from a CBP under Joe Biden. There was 1,272 nationals of Iran released in the country between OFO and the Border Patrol. And you compare that to the Trump administration, zero. Right, 0 releases. And right now, because of President Trump's leadership, we have the most secure border in my lifetime, most secure border in the history of this nation. So we have a secure border. That was President Trump's big win on securing this nation. So we're not releasing people in this country. Special interest aliens aren't crossing that border undetected. But under Joe Biden, we had over 10 million people cross that border. But my biggest concern from day one, beyond the fentanyl, beyond the sex trafficking of women and children, were the 2 million known gotaways. Over 2 million people crossed that border. We don't know who they are, where they came from, because they got away, because Border Patrol is so overwhelmed with the humanitarian crisis that Biden created that over 2 million people crossed the border and got away. That is my biggest concern, and that's what created the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
And you have that on surveillance, seeing people get away. Do you have a sense of where they went?
All right. Let me tell you a few things. I said right to our guest, but let me tell you a few things. It's been nice enough to text it to me. Here's a Truth Social post from the president. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA, make Iran great again, he says. President has talked to the British Prime Minister about the need to get Iran back to the negotiating table. And it's being reported that Iran did move some of its equipment out of the hit sites, which again concerns some people that they'll make a weapon. All right, joining us now, three folks, two of the five members quintet of the group chat here on Two Way, the Honorable Nina Turner and Dan Turrentine, who's Natalie dressed, and Bill. Is your last name pronounced Roggio?
That's correct.
Roggio. Bill, welcome in. Bill, we'll start with you, and I want to, because I believe your first time on the platform, Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Sounds like a very fancy title. How did you gain your national security experience? What have you been in government? Are you an academic? Tell us.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting story. I started in the military in the 90s, tracked Al Qaeda and other terrorist organizations before they were a thing. Really started writing about them after 9/11, embedded with the U.S. military to cover operations in Iraq, and the rest is history. Became a fellow at FDD in 2010, and here I am today.
Okay. And would you put yourself in the camp of saying the best way to disarm Iraq is through a negotiated deal or through the kind of military action the president took, or would you have something more nuanced?
I guess it's a little more nuanced. I think it's going to take both. I think the actions that the administration took were necessary. I do agree with Secretary Rubio. Look, that threshold argument has never held water. Iran was always attempting to build a nuclear weapon. He laid that case out perfectly. We've merely delayed the inevitable over time. Iran was never going to negotiate away its nuclear program. Regimes like Iran or the groups like the Taliban, which the Trump administration negotiated with and cut a deal, which turned around and discarded it. You cannot trust these regimes to abide by an agreement, an international agreement, because they use negotiations to further their own goals, to weaken us, to get us to not use military action. Look, I want to be very clear, Mark, and everyone here. I've tracked the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Somalia and elsewhere. We failed miserably in these wars. So if anyone is very reticent about using military force overseas, I am one of those people. But there are certain things that are necessary. What is not understood about the Iranian regime is how many Americans it's killed just over the last 2 decades. And I'm not just talking about against U.S. forces in Iraq. This happened in Afghanistan. I testified as an expert witness in a case called Cabrera v. Iran, and we won the case. And the case proved that Iran provided material support for both the Taliban and Al Qaeda. And it wasn't trivial. It rivaled that of Pakistan's support for the Taliban. I estimate that Iran was responsible for killing thousands of Americans and sabotaging our efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. We go back to the Marine barracks bombing in 1983, a host of terrorist activities. Iran is the destabilizing force throughout the Middle East. It's not something you can negotiate. But here's the thing. You hit them hard enough. They fear these strikes on their own soil more than anything, because what it does is it shows the Iranian people that they're weak and that they're vulnerable. If the Iranian regime wants to survive, it has to at some point come to the table, because if it does decide to either, and has a range of options, and I'm sure we'll talk about them later, but if it decides to launch direct missile attacks, use its proxies, shut down the Strait of Hormuz, whatever, terrorist attacks across the globe and assassinations, which it's capable of doing. If it does that, not only is Israel prowling the skies and destroying Iranian military and other capabilities at this moment, it does not need the United States to weigh in any further here. That could directly threaten the survival of this regime.
Thank you, Bill. Very grateful to you for joining. Nina, I'd love for you to unmute and tell folks just your overall view of the president's actions, what your concerns are going forward. And again, thank you for making time.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So good to be with you and the two-way family. Glad that Dan is here, part of the group chat colleagues. I'm very disappointed in the president. I mean, he ran on not having forever wars. He did a lot during the campaign to try to distinguish himself from President Biden, and having no forever wars in the Middle East was one of them. I do want us for a moment just to center humanity. In other words, we cannot war our way to peace. Diplomacy is always the way to go. We should always exhaust diplomacy. And especially in this case, when this wasn't our deal at all. Somebody's son, daughter, family member is going to get hurt. And that's both the people on the soil in Iran, American soldiers, other people's soldiers and families are all going to be impacted. And I bet we can't knock on one door and ask people, do they want their loved ones sent over to die? So that is the main thing. Most of the American public do not want this to happen. And it's happening, Mark, on the backdrop of a president whose big, beautiful bill is destabilizing people in their health care and SNAP benefits. We saw that the parliament, I believe, of Iran has voted to close the Strait of Hormuz, whether or not they got authority to do it or not. That's not the point. The point is that Iran in some way is going to snap back. They're certainly not powerful to beat the United States of America, but that should never be the goal right there. This president had an awesome opportunity to be a diplomat, but yet he let his ego get in the way to bomb Iran in this way. And it is going to build generational resentment, and it is going to have both an indirect and direct ripple effect, notwithstanding the fact that he is violating Article 1 of the United States Constitution.
Thank you, Nina. As we like to say here, you speak for tens of millions with all of that. Dan, as I said at the top, the range of opinion within the party about this, from impeachment to support. Here's a guy named Jamie Metzl, who served on the National Security Council under President Clinton. He was Joe Biden's deputy staff director at Senate Foreign Relations, voted for Kamala Harris. He says, no actions like this come without, this is on Twitter, no actions like this come without risks. And I imagine the story will get more complicated over time, but that's why these types of decisions are complicated. Although I believe electing Kamala Harris would have been better for our democracy, society, and economy, as well as for helping the most vulnerable people in the US and around the world, I also believe VP Harris would not have had the courage or fortitude to take such an essential step as the president took. Dan, where are you? Where is the party now on evaluating what the president did and what should be done next?
Well, I think, as you said, Mark, the party is really divided. I mean, I think the quintessential example is Chuck Schumer, who was silent for most of the night last night and then put a statement out to the media, did not put it on his Senate website, did not post it to social media. I mean, I think he's kind of trying to be on the record without having too much of a paper trail. But I think the party is badly divided. And I think, I believe Kamala Harris actually probably would have made this decision more because she would have felt the pressure from Israel and everyone else and might not have necessarily had the patience to think this through. I think the big thing now, for those who say he should be impeached, in my opinion, it's not a serious statement. It's kind of like on immigration when we talk about, ICE shouldn't exist. People just tune us out after that. I think what comes next is the real question. And if there is more, like there are reports now that we did not knock out Fedoro, that we've damaged it, but they're not sure how badly. You said, Mark, that some of the material is out. If our goal is they have no nuclear weapons, then what? And so that's where I think Democrats it is appropriate to say, hey, if this is going to expand beyond kind of one precision attack, Congress does need to at some point get involved. But I do think the president had the right to do this, whether I agree with it or not. There's a lot of questions and Congress is now going to rightfully ask a lot of questions.
Okay, let's go to your questions now. If you want to be in on the conversation, you're here on the platform, please raise your hand for Bill and Nina and Dan and Johnny, you first. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind.
Hey, good afternoon. Johnny here. I'm currently in Siesta Key, Florida, visiting family, but I'm stationed in San Diego. But I spent many years on destroyers and stationed in Bahrain. A lot of friends that are still there. And right now, people are really, particularly in Fifth Fleet, because the governments over there do not technically monitor and restrict access to things on the internet. So we do a lot of open source monitoring of X accounts, etc. Uh, Reza Pahlavi is really being floated around a lot, both in Israeli circles and in Iranian circles that have different types of social media accounts. And I was wondering if you guys had any opinion on that. I think, Mark, you brought up one point that a regime change might take, Iranian Americans and, prominent, successful Iranians that have emigrated here, kind of fostering a new government and a new regime there, if that is the direction that the people decide to take. And I think I kind of see this path emerging as he's calling Congress people, meeting with high level Iranian Americans in the United States. And I just given the open source chatter on that, I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Bill, you first.
Yeah, sure. The Iranian resistance or opposition, whatever you want to call it, it's going to have to pick up arms if it wants to take control of their country, if it wants to depose the mullahs. That is a violent, brutal regime. Look, nobody wants peace more in the Middle East, but you don't get peace at the negotiating table in these parts of the world. These are places where you have to fight for it. And the Iranians themselves have not shown themselves to have any willingness, in my estimation. It's been 46, 47 years that the radical mullah regime has been in charge. And there's been yes, protests and opposition to the government, but this is their moment. If they want, and I haven't seen him or any other Iranian figure put together an effective opposition. He's a great name. He looks great on camera, but does he really have the chops to do the dirty work to overthrow a government, to overthrow a regime that throws people off of buildings, that hangs them off of cranes in center squares? I mean, these are the type of people, Nina, I know you want to negotiate with them, but these are not the kind of people you can negotiate with.
Bill, the United States of America is in no moral positioning historically to talk about the brutality of another government. Historically, under no chattel slavery, by way of example, almost 250 years worth. So under no moral authority to allow 68,000 people every single year to die because they do not have health care in this country. Millions more underinsured. No moral authority. Now, Bill, that does not mean that I don't see the brutality of the Iranian government, but my point is this: they are a sovereign nation, and the United States of America does not have the right to decide. Bill, that would be just like other people from other countries saying, you know what? I don't like President Obama, or I didn't like President.
At no point Biden, United States overthrow the Iranian regime.
Or I don't like President
putting
Trump.
words in my mouth.
So
At no point said that.
So
I said the
Bill,
Iranian people themselves
another country is
take
going
up
to
arms if they want their
overthrow
free
our
time.
leadership. That sounds ludicrous, right? As Americans, we would never allow another nation to say, because they don't like our leaders, that they just gonna come up in
Again,
here.
I made no such argument, Nina.
He didn't talk about American leading regime change in Iran.
I know. So what I'm saying is that we as Americans have to look at that and say, even as vile as the leadership over there is, they are a sovereign nation, which is my point. And I do not believe that we can war our way to peace.
Yeah. Okay. Niv, welcome in. Unmute if you would. Tell folks where you're walking and what's on your mind for Dan and Nina and Bill.
Hey, I'm just walking on a local rail trail. It's quite hot out here, but
where do you live?
I'm currently at my parents' at my parents' home in Southern Tier in Binghamton.
Welcome in.
Upstate New York. Yeah.
I have a home up in Pennsylvania, near there in Uniondale. So
it's not too far.
Neighbors.
Yep. I just wanted to make a point about the chatter about installing Shah's son as a future leader. I mean, it just prima facie, it just seems ridiculous. I mean, we're gonna install a monarch as Americans. I mean, in 2025 especially. Um, it it honestly, I know democracy didn't work in Middle East, but I don't think monarchy is gonna work after 50 years. So it's like not, I mean, being overturned 50 years ago.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea in the movie version.
Right. It doesn't make sense in real life. I don't believe.
Yeah.
I mean, Fox News calling him His Royal Highness just seems ridiculous to me, quite honestly.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's two parts to this, which is I don't know how the Iranian people would take somebody who I presume they would hear on the streets that the Israelis and the Americans are backing. I mean, that may be the kiss of death if, for that person. But this has always been the question, which is if you get rid of the nuclear weapons or you badly damage them, but you leave in place the people who are hell-bent on acquiring them, then what have you done? And if they do fall, do you really run the risk of, I don't care who comes next? I mean, it could be worse. It could be people who are even more hell-bent on getting them, who cut a deal with the North Koreans to, buy them off, or we'll give you oil if you give us a nuke. So I think this is the real risk now, which is we have a vested interest in who runs Iran now, because we are on record, we dropped bombs, that they cannot have a nuclear weapon. So we have to try to now ensure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good walk. Appreciate it. Carly, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind for Nina and Dan and Bill.
I just driving home from a body of water. I have a question. How does Iran have the authority to close the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, that's a great question. But they don't have any authority to do it. But Bill, operationally, how would they do it?
Yeah, they can do this multiple ways. They could lay mines throughout the strait. It's obviously one of the world's choke points. I think the number is around 15 to 20% of the world's petroleum passes through that strait. That, and which the Houthis did, right, when they shut the strait down, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And the Houthis used missiles. They used underwater drones. They used aerial drones to do this. Now, the attacks weren't all that effective, but in order to get shipping to stop, all you need to do is make the threat and lob some type of weaponry, and that's exactly what the Houthis did. And you saw 90% of the traffic start diverting around the Horn of Africa, and the cost of goods, of transportation, and everything skyrocketed during that time. So they have the capabilities to do this. It's harder for the Iranians to hit Israel than it is to hit would be to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, because they can use short-range missiles, which they have an abundance of. But again, the Iranians risk the wrath of not just the United States. I would expect some Western countries, and even the Arab countries, the Saudis, the UAE, the Qataris, can start weighing in here, because that is going to hit them directly in their pocketbook. The Iranians, right now, they're threatening to do it. But to me, the proof is in the pudding. If they actually try to do this, they may bring down, and look, Vice President Vance, President Trump, and others have directly stated that the U.S. will respond forcefully if the Iranians attack the U.S. or U.S. interests throughout the region. We shall see.
Bill, operationally, if the president says to the Pentagon, I don't want them to shut down the strait, what can we do to keep them from laying mines or firing missiles? How can we counter that if that's what they decide to do?
Yeah, we'd have to destroy the Iranian Navy, which would be very simple to do. The fact that it still exists at this point is kind of a surprise to me. Those missile launch sites would be hit. So look, the Israelis have already established what's called air dominance, which means U.S. aircraft or Israeli aircraft, any aircraft can fly and conduct missions without being threatened. That's how we were able to conduct that attack.
Are all of the efforts, if they wanted to shut down the straits through either mines or missiles or a combination, is all of those things, are those all sea operations?
Air and sea operations, yeah. With leverage US air.
Do they still have air capability? I thought they really didn't.
The Iranians, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were referring to the United States.
No.
The Iranians have very little air capability.
Yeah.
Most of this would be done by sea. They also have an expansive fleet of small boats that they can use, and they have used in the past to ram in like suicide operations as well. So you have to take out that fleet.
One more for you, because I've been asked this by several people over the last week. Why haven't the Israelis, maybe they haven't, they're not talking about it, but why haven't we heard about the Israelis taking out the Iranian sea capability?
Because it isn't a direct threat to the Israelis. The only threat that has emanated by sea from the Iranians is when they were running an intelligence ship up and down the Gulf of, the Red Sea. But that really was to interdict U.S. international shipping and some Israeli shipping. So it's a matter of the Iranians don't have unlimited assets to strike all of the threats that emanate from Iran. So the Israelis have to prioritize.
Carly, thank you. Welcome. Mr. Shaw, welcome. And tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind for Nina and Dan and Bill.
Thank you. Love the coverage. Love the shows as they increase on two-way. I'm Mike ML from St. Louis, voted for Trump. I just wanted to say I kind of heard it a little bit in the way that Rubio was talking on some interviews this weekend, but I feel like the Free Press, Barry Weiss, they did a podcast yesterday about the same time when two-way was covering it as well. Very good coverage. I encourage folks to listen to it. But I would say Israel had really two goals. It's not regime change. That's just talk on the side to distract and disrupt from the main event, like any other thing, I feel like. But Israel's goals were to curb their nuclear program and then also curb their medium intercontinental ballistic missile production facility. Their ability to facilitate that, I feel like, hasn't gotten coverage. And also of note, I feel like people are so on a hair trigger to jump to World War III, whether it's actually they feel that way or if it's just rhetoric, which I feel 90% of it is just rhetoric and noise. We haven't bombed their power grid. We haven't bombed their true economic centers for their production of their oil or their gas. We really are giving them time to come to the table. I hope they do. But I think a lot of people are overemphasizing a lot of things that they don't know a lot about too. That goes on everywhere. But I would just like to focus on that point. And I think that if we continue on, we'll go ahead and grab that, help the Israelis to dismantle their ability, because China flew in a whole bunch of equipment when they got wiped out in October, I believe. Might be a little silly on that, and maybe somebody can speak to that. But anyway, I just wanted to comment on that.
Raised a lot of really good points, and want everybody to pick up on whatever they wish. Nina, you first.
Yeah, I mean, we just gonna bomb them a little bit. We just gonna bomb them just a little bit, and then all of a sudden they're gonna come to the table. That's madness. We are breeding resentment generationally. We have no right. Netanyahu's government had no right to do to Iran what they did, regardless. A lot of international experts have been saying on all the Sunday shows that the positioning of Iran nuclear capability is the same that it was 2 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago. And there is no proof that they have all the things necessary to amass a nuclear weapon. So if we are saying that any nation can wake up on any given day and decide that they don't like this regime or that regime and then just bomb sovereign nations just randomly, then we have a bigger problem than I thought. That's number one. And two, number three is we're talking about other people's flesh and blood. So there are going to be casualties, both in Iran. There may be American casualties at some point. Innocent people are going to be collateral damage. The environment surely is going to be damaged by this. So I just don't understand, Mark, for the life of me, how people can just casually say, oh, we'll just bomb them a little bit. And now they're going to come to the table and be willing to negotiate. That's just like somebody coming up to you and slapping the hell out of you and saying, now let's sit down and talk.
I understand.
It's not human nature.
Dan.
Mike makes right. I mean,
well, I agree with Nina, and I disagree with Nina a little bit. I do agree that I'm a little curious at this argument from the administration today that we're not at war with Iran, we're just at war with their nuclear program. I mean, in my opinion, Nina, I'm kind of with you. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You bomb a country, whatever the asset is, you bomb a country, right? So if they just responded and say, well, we just blew up your base in Iraq and killed 400 Marines, but we're not at war with America, I think we'd all be like, WTF, go to hell. But I do disagree in that they are a threat to the United States. Bill, you've said it. Like, they were very involved in Iraq. They were very involved in Afghanistan, let alone, other activities they did. And it has been our policy, Democrat and Republican administrations, that they cannot achieve nuclear weapons. And we can, I'm sure we'll find out here soon or in history just how close they were. But there is no debating that they were getting very, very close.
But then, shouldn't we be pushing for nuclear disarmament?
Well, we have. I mean, look, we have, and there's two ways to look at that, Nina. And I mentioned this last night. I agree with a lot of Obama people who are rolling their eyes that are like, you undid our deal, and then you kind of came back in the last month and said, I want basically the same deal, right? But it's also pretty clear that the Obama deal, Iran didn't stop. They moved pieces around. They kind of kept doing it behind the curtain. And so I do think Trump gave it a pretty good effort to try to get a deal. But, this is why presidents for 5 years or 5 different presidents have kicked the can down the road. It was ultimately this exact question.
Yeah, Bill, I want to get you in, but I want to read you some. I want to read you some reporting from NBC News. Iran sent a communique to Trump in the days before last night's strikes, threatening to activate sleeper cell terror inside the U.S. if it were attacked. The message got to Trump through an intermediary at the Group of Seven summit in Canada last week, which Trump left early. Blah blah blah. Bill, I'd love for you to respond to both what Mr. Shaw said and asked, and also this NBC report.
Yeah, and really quick before I definitely want to respond to Mr. Shaw's question. It's very important. But first, I also disagree with Mr. Vance's statement that we haven't been at war with Iran, or we aren't at war with Iran. The problem is Iran has been at war with us since its founding. I've outlined that. It's clear. Sometimes you don't get to pick the wars that you're in. Sometimes they pick you, and the Iranians have picked us. But to answer Mr. Shaw's question, yeah, I think the talk of a spread of World War III here, and I have concerns, don't get me wrong, but I think it's very much on the low end of the spectrum. You'd have to get the Russians involved and the Chinese involved. And the reality is that while the Russians and the Chinese use countries like Iran as a foil against us, the last thing they want is a nuclear war on their borders in their region to pollute their countries. They also have their great concern about the mullah regimes. Both countries have experienced threats from jihadist terrorism over the past. They know what the Iranians are, just like they understand what the Pakistanis are, the governments, not the people, to be clear. And they look at these countries side-eyed. Now, as far as the issue of sleeper cells, if that report is true, then here you have it. We're being threatened by a country that has said they've put sleeper cells in the United States to attack us. I don't know what more I could say about this. Yes, I'd love to cut a nuclear deal with the Iranians and not go to war with them. But again, we have been at war with the Iranians. Again, the Iranians have killed thousands of our people, sabotaged our foreign policy in the region, and is responsible. It is the destabilizing force in the Middle East and essentially in large portions of the world. And we can't pretend that we know that the Iranians have attempted to launch attacks. They tried to blow up the Saudi embassy a decade ago. We foiled that plot. And there's been other plots like that have been attempted to be executed by the Iranians on our soil. And we're supposed to act like this is a country that's, just really wants to get along, but it doesn't.
Yeah. Mr. Shaw, thank you. I want to say something about this platform. This platform welcomes moderate centrists and independents, but this is not a platform only for moderate centrists and independents. It's a platform for everybody. Nina's speaking for tens of millions of people. And if you disagree with Nina, of course it's your right. But if you want to pretend that she's not speaking for tens of millions of people, you're being as blind as people who don't understand the Trump MAGA movement have been for the last 10 years. Nina wants to understand those folks. I know she does. You all should want to understand Nina's speaking for tens of millions. And you're living in the same country as those people, and they may win the next presidential election. So I would listen to Nina and learn from Nina rather than saying, well, Nina, I don't agree with Nina, so I don't want to watch two-way. That's not what this platform is. This platform is for everybody. And it's to hear opposing views because there aren't very many places where you can do that. And I think next to no place where you can do it in a civil conversation. Thank you for your listening. Beth, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you're driving and what's on your mind for Nina and Dan and Bill. Are you able to unmute? You got
Beth,
to
I think you're muted.
Don't crash, Beth.
I'm driving from Chicago to Peoria. We spent the weekend in 100-degree heat. And I appreciate Nina being on the platform. And I'm curious, I understand, I wouldn't call it rage, but her anger at the U.S. taking this stand that she thinks doesn't comport with a moral country.
Well, or not to speak for Nina, but I'd say many think it doesn't comport with morality or our own self-interest.
Right. Okay. So I would really love to hear her explain to me how she squares the treatment of women by the Iranian regime. And in particular, my view is they consider women to be property. And I listened to a couple of men from the Muslim world talk about how they justify covering women up and insisting that they're covered up. And to cover women up, especially when it's 80, 90, 100 degrees. And I listened to Van Jones, and Van Jones, he raised some questions. He said, for any progressive that isn't bothered by the behavior of the Iranians, they, mutilate women for showing hair. They throw people off buildings. As intolerant as anybody. So if she could just help me understand how she views this really unkind treatment of women.
Yep, it's a great question, Beth, and it's a huge issue for anyone thinking about Iran. Nina, and then we've been joined by our colleague at two-way, Meghan McCain, who will also weigh in, thank you, Meghan, overall on how she views the situation, but maybe start with this issue of how women are treated in Iran. Nina.
No, I appreciate that, Beth, and Mark, I definitely appreciate you. Yeah, there's definitely been some crazy comments in there just because people don't agree with my political view. But Beth, I appreciate that. No, I'm not happy that the Iranian government would treat women differently or disrespectfully. I'm also not happy about the disrespectful nature of how American women are treated here. There was a time in this country's history, and that's why I mean that we don't have moral high ground, but if we go to countries and say, let's learn from our experience. Beth, I hear stories from older women who tell me there was a period of time in this country where women could not own credit cards. They had to get their husband's permission. That there was in practice, there's a difference between de jure and de facto. So in fact, that women were very limited in this country on how they could move, how they can comport themselves, what they can own and what they could not own. So from that vantage point, I'm very disturbed that you have mainly male legislators who have decided that women cannot control their own bodies. Now, this is not a matter of whether you're pro-abortion or not, right? I'm pro-choice, I'm not pro-abortion. But that male legislators have decided in the United States of America that they're going to legislate on women's bodies. I'm very disturbed about that. I'm very disturbed when women lose their health care or don't have enough health care or not making enough money to be able to help their families. So Beth, in that regard, I'm a humanitarian. So I don't want to see women put upon in any country. But what I do understand is that Iran is a sovereign nation. I do understand that there are women in the Muslim tradition who cover up and they want to wear their covering. Not all of these women are being put upon. Yes, Beth, I have friends in that community. I have family members in that community. So don't say that it is not true. It is not our job to put upon another culture our wishes. We cannot do that. So yeah, I am disturbed that anybody is oppressed, period, whether it is in another country or here. But my argument is this: we need to take care of inequity and inequality for women in the United States of America before we start going over there looking in somebody else's backyard. But I appreciate you, Sister Beth. I do.
Yeah. Megan, overall view and view of the issue of the women's treatment in Iran, please, and thank you for joining.
Sure. First of all, I didn't know I was supposed to wear an evening gown. Dan's wearing a tuxedo. I
The memo, Megan, the memo.
I am like in the country in Arizona, so I apologize, but I got
the invite technically said black tie optional. So.
Well, apparently Nina and I didn't get the it's okay. I never dress up unless I have to. Anyway, I'm sorry. I also want to say, Nina, I don't know you at all, but I know we're colleagues now. I have been Nina in like every work situation I've ever been where I'm the odd person out, and it's a really hard gig. And I disagree with everything you've been saying, Nina, but it's important, as Mark said, to showcase this opinion because we can't live in silos and we have to hear what the other side of the country is thinking, and it's really important. I get really frustrated when people are so shocked by my views because they're only in a silo. So that's all I want to say, even though I'm sure we disagree on everything, Nina. Two things. Number one, I just saw an article about how there were two girls in Iran who were making dance TikToks who are now sentenced to death for making dance TikToks. So for me, it's very hard. I understand what Nina, what you're saying, like America has a complicated history, but I'm living in 2025, and I think I'm so glad that my daughters can't be put to death for TikTok videos. My old show, The View, actually, Whoopi got in a lot of trouble, and there were actually the first time I've ever seen some of the hosts put things on their social media following up, trying to clarify their statements, comparing her experience as an American to Iranian women. And there was like a lot of outcry. And I only saw it because people always send me stuff from The View. But I will say, for me, I just don't understand anyone sort of being in any way okay with a country who chants death to America, death to Israel, and who, by all intents and purposes, was very close to making a nuclear weapon. I'm thrilled that President Trump did what he did. I find it a little unexpected, just given that I thought he was less hawkish than me, quite frankly. And I disagree with what you said, Bill, although you're much more of an expert than I am. I actually think what Vice President Vance is trying to say is that, like, this is a strategic mission that's not going to be boots on the ground. And I do think there's a difference between war using the planes we just did and boots on the ground. I'm very happy. I have been like Laring, Credence, Clearwater Revival. I come from like a hyper military, hardcore conservative family, and I'm really happy that the era of the apology tour and the Obama administration is long gone. I think that was a really bad era in the world, and I actually have faith that this group of people knows what they're doing, and I've been really impressed with Marco Rubio's statement today. And of course, there's everyone's nervous because this is, I come from like the 9/11 generation. Nobody wants like a forever war, but I actually don't think that's what's happening right now. And I've been really impressed with the Trump administration and like very like unexpectedly very happy the past 24 hours or however since it happened. So
yeah, as far as we know, they've conducted none of this operation off signal, for instance, which is good. Thank you, Megan, for that. Bill, I've been turning over in my head what you said, that the only way to have regime change is through armed conflict. And I'm wondering how that would go, right? You've got two separate militaries in Iran. You've got a populace that so far seems to be rallying more than criticizing. But assume you're right. How would that work? Who has enough arms to overthrow the government? Would it be the military? How would that work?
And I want to be clear, I don't believe the U.S. should do this. Again, I spend a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan embedded as a reporter, and I do not. I've witnessed this. We are not good at it, and honestly, we shouldn't be meddling. So
you were talking about an organic.
Do you think the Israelis are capable of doing it?
Absolutely not. We weren't capable of doing it we were capable of overthrowing a regime in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we weren't capable of putting in a regime, a replacement regime that was beneficial to the people. The Iranians, Iraq is a satrapy of the Iranians, and Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban. So we need to be very, very careful. This is where, and Megan, I hear what you're saying. I'm taking his words literally. I'm not in his mind, so I have to take his words literally when he says we are not at war. My point is that the Iranians have been at war with us via their actions, their deeds, and their statements. So Yeah, it would have to, that's the problem. This is why a mission should not be regime change here. If the Iranians can organize to do it, they're going to need elements of the military to throw in with them. The IRGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that's basically the Praetorian Guard for the Mullah regime. They penetrated the traditional Iranian military. The IRGC itself, they're true believers, they're true Islamists. They believe in spreading the Islamic revolution, not just through Iran, but throughout the world. They're going to be tough to fight. And, they're going to need more than just getting in the streets and making TikToks and protesting. They're going to need to fight. They're going to need to convince people who are carrying arms to turn against their government. I saw a lot of heads shake when Mark, when you said, the only way here is through military means. But I would love to hear someone tell me what the option is to overthrow that Iranian regime. It has to come from inside Iran. It has to be organic. And it's not going to come.
What if hundreds of thousands take to the streets of Tehran and protest and defy the government under the eye of the world to kill people or gas them, whatever it is? But to overthrow the government, are they going to have to acquire tanks? Like what would it take to have an armed overthrow?
Yeah, we've seen revolutions like this in post-Soviet 1991, right? Collapse of the Soviet Union. There's been multiple revolutions like this where the people have risen up. And usually what's involved is elements of the military and the police, significant elements side with the people. But the people have to hit the streets. They also have to be prepared to do some dirty work themselves. They have to be prepared to fight. It's not going to happen peacefully. And the reason it's not going to happen peacefully is because this is a desperate regime. They're true believers. They believe in their cause, and they're not going to surrender control without a fight. So the only way to oppose that is to fight yourselves. I wish it weren't so, but history is replete with examples of this.
Yeah, and of course, there's a connection between the fierceness of the regime and their interest in holding power, and those in the United States and elsewhere in Israel who've said that regime can't have nuclear weapons. The marriage of a regime like that and nuclear weapons is with the exception of North Korea, is singular on the planet, right? The other nuclear powers, Pakistan, etc., India, they just don't have the same kind of government. They don't have the same hostility, expressed hostility to Israel in this case.
Well, and Mark, there's one other point which the guys from International Intrigue made on Thursday night, which is Iran is a very the population is spread out around the country, and they were talking about how there are all these little towns with good numbers of people. It's 90 million people. They're not all in Tehran, so part of it is you could take over the capital, but what if the surrounding areas are not with you? Like it's a more complicated situation. They're trying to take over Texas. Can't just take Austin. You got to take the rest of the state.
It's now the case. Go ahead, Nina.
Why are we in the business of taking over other people's stuff, though?
We keep saying that we're not. We shouldn't be in the business.
No, but I'm saying, Bill, even the president now, he said it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. But
I disagree.
Don't take him either seriously or literally on that one, Nina. He's just playing.
But
he's just playing around. Oh, I do. He put it on the table, so we have to discuss it.
Mark, you don't think he's laying the groundwork a little bit on that? Not for us, but like
he's
going to stop our involvement right here.
Well, the people of Iran.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the Obama and Megan, we'll get to you in just a second. The people of the Obama administration was desperate for the Iranian people to rise up. They're desperate for it. They really thought that was the key, and they did what they could. But it's a repressive regime, and it's a difficult thing. Megan.
I just think it's interesting that we seem to be in a new era of what we also expect from our allies, because Israel cleared the way for this. The only reason we ended up doing this is because they have neutered and annihilated so much of Iran's strength. Yeah. And I think I really am such a fan of JD Vance's. I really am looking to so much of what he says. And he went on Meet the Press today, and he was like, the difference between our administration and past administrations is we don't have a dumb president. That's obviously a knock at President Bush. And like, again, I can't emphasize this enough. Like, I just saw my brother today. He's deployed more times than I can remember. Started when he was 16 after 9/11. Like, I get that we are a war-weary generation. I just do not believe that President Trump and Vice President Vance are going to put boots on the ground in any situation, sort of short of something being like completely cataclysmic. And I do think they're signaling like the era of us just sending in hundreds and thousands of American men and women is over. I think we are expecting more of our allies than the Bush administration did. And I, for one, think that's a great thing.
But Megan, do you think that just because the United States of America may not necessarily put boots on the ground, that the lives of other people's people is not just as important, and that there's a direct and indirect consequence for all of us? So to me, no one should be giddy about going to war, even if some people think it's justified. It's just asinine to me that people would be celebrating, and I'm not saying you're celebrating, but what I'm asking is, even if it's not Americans that are hurt physically, is it okay for other people, other nations' citizens to be put in harm's way, even the Iranians?
You're asking me to, I mean, look, obviously.
Just in general, not, I'm just.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to die, especially innocent civilians. I do think the tragedy of regimes like the Ayatollah is that they don't care about their civilians, that they care about ultimate power. And I think the same thing is happening, like with Russia and Ukraine. Like they clearly don't give a shit about the civilians in Ukraine either. I mean, there's images of pregnant women getting blown off, war as hell. For me, if I sound callous, my interests are my country. And maybe that makes me like less of a humanitarian than you or anyone else, and so be it. But I
mine too. I'm with you.
Sure. Yeah. I just, like I said, it's a really complicated question. And I certainly am well aware of the fact, like, after we left Iraq, ISIS came as a result. After we left Afghanistan, now people are trading children for food. Like, this is not cut and dry. I do not want, like, if someone's like, do you want a regime change war? No, I do not. But do I feel safer now that, like, nuclear weapons have been ostensibly eliminated from Iran? Yes, I do. But
just one more point too, Megan. I'm not putting you and I are having this conversation. Your point about,
don't worry.
The point that it's a regime that doesn't respect its own people, it kills its own people. Does that mean that we should be okay with killing them? At a certain point, this does not make sense to me. And that doesn't mean you're less of a humanitarian. We're just seeing this in some points similarly, and some points.
Okay, we're over time. I want to thank Nina, Dan, Megan, Bill for spending an hour.
Come on my show, Nina.
I would love to, Megan. Let's do it.
All right. Grateful to you all for making time. Grateful to you all for watching. And Dan and Sean and I will be back at 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. As you see now, we're getting a little bit more inclined to pop up when there is news. So maybe we'll see you later tonight. If not, we'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And again, Bill, great to have you on the platform, and we hope you'll come back.
Thank you so much, Nina. Great talking with you, Megan. Dan, I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you all. We'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern time or before here on Two Way. Grateful to you for being part of the community. Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.